About 4 years ago, I found myself needing a roommate after my previous one moved out abruptly. I posted ads everywhere: Craigslist, Facebook groups, community boards, hoping to quickly fill the room to cover rent. After a few interviews that went nowhere, I finally met Alex. He seemed perfectly ordinary, friendly, polite, and had a stable job. We chatted comfortably, shared some laughs, and I felt relieved I'd found someone reliable to move in. I didn't notice anything strange about him at first, and for a few months, things were genuinely great. Alex was quiet, tidy, and mostly kept to himself. He worked a steady job at a warehouse nearby, usually leaving early in the morning and coming back late at night. Our conversations were pleasant but brief, nothing deeper than casual small talk. Everything felt totally normal, and my initial nervousness about sharing my space with someone new gradually faded. Life continued this way until I began noticing small oddities, insignificant at first, but unsettling over time. I started to realize that Alex didn't really seem to have any friends or family visiting. Ever. In fact, I never saw him interact with anyone aside from brief exchanges with neighbors or myself. He never mentioned personal details about himself, even in casual conversation, and quickly steered away from questions that became too personal. At first, I assumed he was just private, maybe even shy, and didn't press the issue. Then came the nights where I'd wake up randomly at odd hours, usually around 2 or 3 a.m., with an overwhelming sense of unease, as though someone were in the room with me. I would listen carefully but heard nothing more than silence or the occasional distant creak, typical of an older building. Still, the feeling lingered heavily, and sleep would evade me for hours. Over time, I noticed a pattern. These unsettling nights almost always coincided with Alex's days off work. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, an overactive imagination from watching too many horror movies. Yet I couldn't completely shake off the suspicion. One evening, while Alex was out, I decided to ease my anxiety by checking around his room, something I'd never normally do. But my curiosity and concern had grown overwhelming. At first glance, everything looked ordinary, almost too neat and tidy. The room had very few personal belongings: a neatly made bed, plain clothes folded meticulously, and a shelf containing books about history and psychology. But then my eyes caught sight of something out of place, a book partially hidden under his bed. Pulling it out, my stomach twisted uncomfortably as I saw its cover, an old leather-bound book covered in strange symbols, clearly satanic in nature. Heart racing, I flipped through its pages, which were filled with disturbing imagery and cryptic writings. Beside the book, hidden further beneath the bed, were several grotesque dolls made of twisted cloth and twigs, their crude features unsettlingly human. Every nerve in my body screamed to get out, but something urged me to keep looking. I felt I needed answers. My hands trembling, I searched deeper and found another item tucked away carefully, an old, worn notebook. Flipping through it sent chills down my spine. The pages were filled with meticulous notes detailing exact times of my comings and goings. But even more unsettling were pages of rambling entries where Alex had written about me, expressing a secret, obsessive interest in me, interspersed with strange references to rituals and dark intentions. Panic surged through me. Shaken to the core, I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, terrified he'd discover I'd seen it. I knew immediately I couldn't confront him directly, not knowing how he'd react, but staying wasn't an option either. I spent the next few days discreetly planning my move, terrified every moment spent in the apartment. Each night became a grueling ordeal, as I'd lie awake listening carefully to every subtle noise, afraid to sleep. Finally, after the longest few days of my life, I quietly packed up while Alex was at work, leaving behind nothing more than a brief note about sudden family obligations. I never saw him again, never spoke to him again, and tried desperately to put the whole terrifying experience behind me. I was driving home late one night after visiting friends in another town. It was a long drive, and I was already exhausted, but I was determined to get home instead of stopping somewhere overnight. I had done this drive plenty of times before, and I felt confident I'd be fine, even though the route took me through some pretty remote areas. Around 1 a.m., I found myself on a lonely stretch of highway surrounded by thick forest on both sides, with no signs of civilization for miles. The only source of light was my car's headlights cutting through the darkness. Suddenly, my car made a strange noise, and before I knew it, it started to sputter and slowed to a crawl. My heart sank as I pulled over onto the narrow shoulder, realizing something was seriously wrong. I checked my phone, but predictably, I had no signal in this remote area. Panic slowly crept in as I wondered how long it would take for someone to pass by at this hour. After waiting anxiously for about 20 minutes, headlights appeared behind me. Relief flooded through me as a pickup truck slowed down and pulled off the road behind my car. An older man stepped out and approached cautiously. He seemed friendly enough, asking if I needed help. Desperate, I explained my situation, and he offered to take a look at the engine. While he checked under the hood, I stood nearby, chatting nervously. But soon, something about his demeanor began to feel off. His questions got more personal, asking things like if I was traveling alone, where exactly I lived, and if anyone was expecting me tonight. Every instinct in my body started screaming warnings, but I tried to remain calm, hoping he'd finish quickly and leave. After a few tense minutes, he stood up from the engine, wiping his hands and saying he'd need some tools from his truck. As he walked back, he paused, glancing toward me in a way that sent chills down my spine. Instead of grabbing tools, he opened his passenger door and started rummaging around, occasionally glancing back at me, clearly checking to see if I was watching. Fear now taking over completely, I decided to trust my instincts. Quietly, I opened my car door and grabbed the small pocket knife I kept in the glove compartment. Just as he emerged from his truck holding something I couldn't quite make out, another set of headlights suddenly appeared from around the bend, approaching quickly. He immediately shoved whatever he was holding back into his truck and nervously watched as the other car pulled up beside us, asking if everything was all right. Taking advantage of the distraction, I quickly stepped forward, explaining my car trouble loudly, trying to subtly convey my fear. The new arrival, sensing something was off, offered to call for roadside assistance, and thankfully had a strong enough signal. The first man seemed agitated and quickly claimed he had somewhere to be, climbing hurriedly back into his truck and speeding off into the darkness without another word. The roadside assistance arrived soon after, and I finally got my car running again. As I drove away, still trembling from the encounter, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if the other driver hadn't shown up when they did. A couple of years ago, I moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of a quiet suburb. At first, I loved living alone, enjoying the peace and quiet that came with having my own space. But soon, something started feeling off. Like someone or something was watching me, especially late at night. Initially, it was just a vague feeling. I'd be watching TV or reading, and suddenly I'd get the sense that someone was observing me. I would glance around quickly, checking windows and doors, but everything always seemed perfectly normal. Still, I couldn't shake the discomfort that lingered afterward. I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself it was just paranoia from living alone for the first time. Things got stranger when I started noticing little things out of place. I'd leave for work and come home to find small items moved slightly or lights on that I swore I'd turned off. Again, I rationalized it, assuming I was simply forgetful or tired from work. But the unease continued growing, becoming harder to ignore. Then one night, while lying in bed, I clearly heard footsteps moving quietly outside my bedroom window. My heart raced, and I froze, listening closely. After a tense minute, the footsteps faded, leaving me terrified. The next morning, I inspected outside and found clear footprints in the dirt just below my window, confirming that someone or something had indeed been there. Panicked, I installed some cheap security cameras around the apartment, hoping they'd ease my anxiety. For a few nights, everything seemed quiet again, and I began relaxing slightly. But soon after, my anxiety spiked when reviewing footage. I caught something strange, like a shadow darting quickly across the camera's view. The footage was grainy, and the shape was blurry, but the movement was unmistakably unnatural. I showed the clip to friends and family, and while most brushed it off as a trick of the light or camera glitch, a few believed it was something paranormal. The nights became unbearable. Every small noise jolted me awake, heart pounding. I often felt cold spots around the apartment and heard faint whispers when no one else was around. One evening, while washing dishes, I caught movement in the reflection of the kitchen window. Turning around quickly, I saw what looked like a faint shadow swiftly darting out of sight into the hallway, leaving me standing frozen in fear. Over the next few weeks, the occurrences intensified. Doors began opening and closing on their own, often waking me in the middle of the night. I started seeing the shadowy figure more frequently, always lingering at the edge of my peripheral vision, vanishing when I tried to look directly. Sleep became a rare and precious commodity as the nightly disturbances escalated into something more terrifying. One particularly chilling night, I woke up feeling an intense pressure on my chest, like someone was sitting on me, pinning me down. Unable to move or scream, I stared helplessly at the dark ceiling until the oppressive weight finally lifted, leaving me gasping for breath and trembling. After that, strange scratches started appearing on the walls and floors, seemingly from nowhere. Terrified and desperate for answers, I reached out to a local paranormal investigator who agreed to visit my apartment. The investigator confirmed my fears, explaining that whatever was in my apartment seemed malevolent and fixated specifically on me. That confirmation was the final straw. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed up quickly, staying with friends until I could find another place. Even after moving, the experience haunted me deeply. Some friends and I decided to take a weekend trip to a remote cabin in the woods. We were excited about the idea of escaping city life for a bit, enjoying nature, hiking, and just relaxing by the fire. The cabin was far off the beaten path, surrounded by dense forest, and promised absolute peace and isolation. When we arrived, everything seemed perfect. The cabin was cozy, the scenery beautiful, and we quickly settled in. The first evening passed without incident, filled with laughter, cooking dinner, and sharing stories around the fire. But later, as the night deepened, something felt off. The surrounding woods seemed to fall unnaturally silent, and despite being indoors with my friends nearby, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next day, we went for a hike, exploring trails that led deeper into the woods. The forest was beautiful, yet oddly eerie. At times, it felt like someone was following us, though we could never pinpoint anything specific. Occasionally, we'd stop and listen, but there was always nothing. Just silence and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Despite our uneasy feelings, we brushed it off as paranoia, laughing nervously and continuing our hike. That evening, things took a chilling turn. As we were preparing dinner, my friend noticed something unsettling through the kitchen window. A shadowy figure stood at the edge of the tree line, motionless and partially obscured by darkness. At first, we thought it might be an animal, but as we watched, the figure clearly shifted, revealing a distinctly human shape. Panic set in as the figure slowly disappeared back into the trees. Unnerved but trying to remain calm, we locked all the doors and windows securely, convincing ourselves it was probably just another camper or hunter who got too close. As darkness fully descended, our unease grew. Every small noise from outside made us jump, and sleep felt impossible. Late into the night, I was jolted awake by a loud banging on the cabin door. My heart racing, I looked around to see my friends equally terrified and awake. The banging continued, growing more frantic. Mustering courage, one friend shouted through the door, demanding to know who it was. The knocking immediately stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that filled us with dread. We waited in tense silence for what felt like hours, but eventually exhaustion overcame us, and we fell into uneasy sleep. The next morning, we quickly packed up and left. We thought regardless if it was just a prank or not, we didn't feel safe. Even now, years later, none of us speak about that night without feeling chills. The memory of that isolated cabin and the unknown figure in the woods serves as a constant, haunting reminder of just how vulnerable we were, miles away from civilization and completely unaware of the dangers lurking silently nearby. 3 years ago, I had to drive through an isolated stretch of highway late at night on my way home from a work conference. It was a long drive, and I was exhausted but determined to reach home rather than stopping overnight. The route took me through miles of empty fields and thick woods with barely any other cars on the road. Around midnight, as I drove down the deserted highway, I noticed the atmosphere becoming heavy and tense. A dense fog rolled in, obscuring my view, making the road ahead nearly invisible. My nerves tightened as I slowed down, trying to keep my focus despite the eerie surroundings. My headlights barely cut through the thick mist, casting odd shadows onto the trees lining the roadside. As I carefully navigated through the fog, I suddenly noticed a figure standing by the side of the road, barely visible in the haze. Heart racing, I slowed slightly, wondering if someone needed help. But as I drew closer, I saw the figure wasn't moving or signaling for assistance. It simply stood completely still, facing away from the road. The sight sent a chill down my spine, and I instinctively sped up again, passing quickly. Just as my heartbeat started to steady, another figure appeared a short distance further ahead, identical in posture and eerie stillness. Again, I drove past, heart pounding even harder now. Within moments, yet another figure emerged from the fog, then another, spaced evenly along the roadside, each one silent, unmoving, and terrifyingly out of place. My panic heightened, and I felt desperate to escape whatever nightmare I'd stumbled into. Suddenly, my car radio crackled loudly with static, startling me badly enough to nearly lose control. In the static-filled noise, a distorted voice seemed to whisper something unintelligible, adding to my growing fear. The fog became thicker, nearly unable to see 10 feet in front of me as more shadowy figures continued to appear. Their presence felt ominous, almost predatory, and the heavy silence was deafening. I kept my eyes focused desperately on the road ahead, afraid to glance sideways and acknowledge the ghostly shapes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the fog began to thin, and the figures stopped appearing. I emerged onto a clear stretch of road, my relief so intense I nearly cried. Shaken and disturbed, I drove the remaining miles home without stopping, constantly checking my rearview mirror, haunted by what I'd witnessed. People I've told this so try to feel like my mind was playing tricks on me. However, I know what I saw. When I was in college, I rented a small house just outside of town. It was an old place, but it was cheap, and I didn't mind that it needed some work. The landlord mentioned it had been sitting empty for a while, but I didn't think much of it until strange things started happening. At first, it was little things. I'd wake up to find cabinet doors open when I was sure I'd closed them. Objects would be in different places than I remembered leaving them. Lights flickered even after replacing the bulbs. It was unsettling, but easy enough to explain away. Then I started hearing noises at night. At first, just faint scratching sounds. I figured it was mice, maybe rats in the walls. But over the next few weeks, it got worse. Shuffling sounds, soft but distinct, always coming from under the floorboards. One night, I stayed up late working on a paper. The house was silent except for the occasional creak from the wind outside. Then, right beneath my feet, I heard something unmistakable. Slow breathing. I froze. My body went numb as I strained to listen. The breathing was deep and ragged, like someone struggling to stay quiet. It lasted for maybe 10 seconds before fading back into silence. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, but it felt too real. The next morning, I decided to check under the house. The crawl space was small and lined with dirt, the kind you'd expect in an old house. I hesitated at the entrance, flashlight in hand, telling myself I was being ridiculous. But as I crouched down and shined the light inside, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. A small, filthy mattress lay in the corner, along with an empty Sprite can and a tattered blanket. Someone had been living down there. I scrambled backward, heart pounding. I immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes. They searched the crawl space but found no one. Whoever had been there was already gone. The officers suspected a squatter had been sneaking in through a loose vent and hiding beneath the house. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shift of the house made me paranoid that whoever had been under there would come back. I barely lasted a week before breaking my lease and moving out. To this day, I still get chills thinking about the breathing. How long had they been under there? How many nights had they listened to me moving around, completely unaware that someone was lying just beneath me, waiting? One time I was house-sitting for my aunt while she was on vacation. It was a nice place in a quiet suburban neighborhood, nothing out of the ordinary. The first couple of nights were uneventful. I watered the plants, fed the cat, and enjoyed having the space to myself. One evening, I came home late from grabbing dinner with a friend. The sun had already set, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the empty sidewalks. As I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The porch light was on, but it flickered like it was struggling to stay lit. I chalked it up to bad wiring and unlocked the front door. The moment I stepped inside, a strange feeling washed over me. The air felt heavier, like someone had been inside just moments before. I locked the door behind me and did a quick walkthrough of the house. Everything seemed normal. The cat was curled up on the couch. The windows were still locked. I told myself I was just being paranoid and went to bed. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound that still haunts me, the unmistakable creak of a floorboard in the hallway. My heart started pounding. I held my breath, listening. Another creak. And then, the softest sound of breathing just outside my bedroom door. I reached for my phone, but before I could even unlock it, the doorknob started to turn. Slowly, deliberately. I shot out of bed, grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a lamp, and yelled as loud as I could, trying to sound aggressive. The sound stopped. A tense, terrifying silence filled the room. Then, footsteps, slow, unsteady. The front door creaked open, then slammed shut. Shaking, I finally got the courage to open my bedroom door and turn on all the lights. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something strange. The faint sound of snoring coming from the living room. Heart still pounding, I slowly crept forward and peeked around the corner. Lying sprawled out on the couch was a man in his mid-40s, clearly passed out, reeking of alcohol. A nearly empty bottle of whiskey rested on the floor beside him. Completely stunned, I grabbed my phone and called the police. I kept my distance, watching in disbelief as the guy snored away, completely oblivious to my presence. When the officers arrived, they shook him awake, and he jolted upright, looking around in confusion. He slurred something about thinking he was in his own house and getting frustrated when his key wouldn't work. He had apparently wandered in through the unlocked back door, made himself comfortable, and passed out before realizing his mistake. The police arrested him for trespassing, but the whole situation left me rattled. I had spent hours terrified, thinking I was being watched by some sinister figure, when in reality, it was just a very drunk, very confused man. That was the last time I ever forgot to lock a door. Around this time last year, I was driving through a rural stretch of highway late at night, heading home from a long trip. It was past 2 a.m., and the roads were completely empty. No streetlights, no signs of life, just miles of darkness ahead and behind me. My gas tank was running dangerously low, so when I spotted a rundown gas station up ahead, I sighed in relief and pulled in. The place looked deserted. The neon sign flickered weakly, and only one dim light shone over the pumps. There were no other cars, and I didn't see a cashier inside. I hesitated for a second, but told myself to just hurry up and get back on the road. As I stepped out and started pumping gas, I kept my head on a swivel. Something about the atmosphere felt off. Too quiet, too still. No wind, no bugs chirping, nothing. Just the rhythmic clicking of the pump. I told myself I was being paranoid and focused on getting done quickly. Then, out of nowhere, I felt something. A presence. Before I could react, a voice spoke just behind me, way too close. "Hey, man. You got any cash?" I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. A man stood inches away from me, too close for comfort. His eyes were wide, jittery, and bloodshot, his skin pale and slick with sweat. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were dirty, torn in places, and his hands twitched at his sides. My heart pounded as I took a quick step back, gripping the pump handle like a lifeline. I hadn't even heard him approach. The gas station was wide open, no cover nearby. How had he gotten so close without me noticing? "I just need some cash," he repeated, voice shaky but firm. "Just $50, man. That's all." I was frozen for a second, trying to decide what to do. My brain screamed at me not to engage, not to escalate. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly, but something about him felt unpredictable. My car door was unlocked, but he was between me and it. I wasn't about to test if I could get inside fast enough. With slow, careful movements, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I didn't even check how much I had. I just grabbed the first bill I could feel and handed it to him. His fingers snatched it so fast they brushed against mine. He looked down at the $50 bill for a split second, then, without another word, he turned and ran. Not walked, ran, full sprint, straight into the darkness beyond the gas station, disappearing behind the building and out of sight. I stood there for a moment, completely frozen. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. No thanks, no explanation. Just took the money and bolted like something was chasing him. I didn't stick around to question it. I finished pumping gas in record time, jumped into my car, and peeled out of there, half expecting to see him running at me in the rearview mirror. But he was gone. Just like that. I drove for another hour before stopping at a well-lit rest stop to breathe. My hands were still shaking. I kept thinking about how quickly it all happened, how close he got before I even knew he was there. I don't know if he was just a desperate junkie or something worse. But I do know that from that night on, I never stopped for gas in the middle of nowhere again. I was living alone in a small apartment, fresh out of college. I should mention, it wasn't in the best part of town, but it was cheap, and I wasn't exactly in a position to be picky. It was a simple one-bedroom place on the 3rd floor, and after a while, I got used to the occasional sounds of neighbors moving around, the creaky pipes, and the street noise outside. One night, I came home late from work, exhausted. I kicked off my shoes, threw my bag on the couch, and headed straight to the shower. The hot water felt amazing after a long day, and for the first time in hours, I finally started to relax. Then, just as I turned off the water, I heard it. A soft, distinct noise. A shuffle. Not from my neighbors. Not from the street. It was inside my apartment. I stood frozen, every muscle in my body tensed. My bathroom door was slightly ajar, letting in the dim glow of the hallway light. My mind raced. Had I left the TV on? Was my front door unlocked? No, I always double-checked. Holding my breath, I reached for my towel, carefully wrapping it around myself as I stepped out of the shower. The apartment was silent again, but something felt wrong. My gut told me I wasn't alone. Slowly, I crept toward my bedroom, listening. And then I saw something out of place. My closet door was open just an inch wider than I'd left it that morning. My pulse pounded in my ears. I had lived alone for months, and I knew for a fact I never left that door open. I stared at it, paralyzed with indecision. If someone was in there, I had 2 choices: run or check. And running meant turning my back on whatever was inside. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a metal water bottle, and took a shaky step forward. My breath was shallow, my hands sweating as I reached for the closet handle. With one quick motion, I yanked the door open. For a second, all I saw were clothes hanging in the dim light. Then, movement. A man. A tall, thin man was crouched in the corner of my closet, eyes wide and bloodshot, staring right at me. His clothes were filthy, his hair greasy and matted. The second our eyes met, he lunged. I screamed and swung the water bottle as hard as I could, catching him across the face. He stumbled back, but not far enough. He grabbed for me, fingers brushing my arm, and I ran. I sprinted out of my apartment, nearly falling down the stairs as I bolted outside, still dripping wet, my towel barely holding on. I banged on my neighbor's door, screaming for help. By some miracle, they answered almost immediately, pulling me inside and locking the door behind me. We called the police, and they arrived within minutes. When they went into my apartment, he was still there, hiding under my bed. Turns out, he had been living in the crawl space above my unit for who knows how long. There was a loose panel in the ceiling of my closet, and he had been sneaking in and out whenever I was gone, or asleep. The cops said he had a knife tucked into his waistband when they found him. I moved out that same week, unable to shake the feeling that for months, I had never actually been alone. A few summers ago, my friends and I decided to go on a camping trip deep in the woods. We wanted to get away from city life, disconnect, and just enjoy a weekend of hiking, fishing, and sitting around the fire. There were 5 of us. Me, my best friend Chris, his girlfriend Emma, and our 2 other friends, Matt and Jamie. We picked a remote spot, far from any other campers, thinking the solitude would be peaceful. The first day was great. We set up our tents, explored the surrounding trails, and spent the evening roasting marshmallows while telling dumb ghost stories. But as night fell, we started hearing strange noises, not just normal forest sounds like rustling leaves or distant animals, but something deeper, more deliberate. Low murmuring, almost like chanting, carried faintly through the trees. At first, we joked that maybe we were just freaking ourselves out, but deep down, we all felt it. The uneasy sensation that we weren't actually alone. As the night stretched on, the noises continued. At one point, Matt swore he saw a flickering light in the distance through the trees. We all turned our flashlights in that direction, but whatever he had seen was gone. The rest of the night was tense, but nothing happened, and by morning, we convinced ourselves it had all been our imaginations. That changed the next evening. We had just finished eating when Jamie pointed out something disturbing. Footprints, fresh ones. They weren't ours, and they circled the camp in a wide arc, as if someone had been quietly walking the perimeter of our site while we slept. The realization made my stomach churn. Someone had been here watching us, moving silently around our camp, and none of us had noticed. As the sun set, an eerie quiet settled over the forest. No insects chirping, no distant animal calls, just dead silence. We debated leaving, but packing up and hiking out in the dark didn't seem like a better option. So, we stayed, huddled close to the fire, trying to keep our nerves in check. That's when we saw them. Distant figures moving between the trees. At first, we thought it was a trick of the firelight, but then Emma gasped. More of them were appearing, circling us, standing just at the edge of the darkness where our flashlights couldn't quite reach. They were dressed in long, tattered robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods. One of them stepped forward, just enough for us to see that his hands were painted red. Whether it was paint or something else, I didn't want to know. Without a word, he raised his arm and pointed directly at us. Panic surged through me. Chris grabbed the hatchet we had for chopping wood, while Matt grabbed a burning stick from the fire, waving it like a weapon. "We need to get out of here," Jamie whispered, her voice shaking. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the figures turned and disappeared into the trees, not running, not panicked, just retreating, like they had made their presence known, and that was enough. We didn't wait to find out what it meant. Within minutes, we were stuffing our tents into our bags, throwing gear together with shaking hands. We didn't stop moving until we made it back to the main trail, where the sight of other campers and the distant glow of a ranger station finally made us feel safe again. To this day, we don't know who or what we encountered out there. We checked the news, local reports, anything that might give us an explanation. But there was nothing. No missing people, no criminal activity in the area, just miles of empty woods and the lingering question of what would have happened if we had stayed one more night.